My youngest daughter called me on Tuesday afternoon in October. She was crying. Her marriage was falling apart. And I told her, "Karen, I'm in the middle of something. Let me call you back." I called her back 3 days later. She picked up. She said, "It's fine, Dad." And that was the last real conversation we ever had. That was 1998. She hadn't called me since 2003. I'm 84 years old, and I've had a long time to sit with that. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was a certain kind of man. I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, working class family. My father worked at a press shop. He came home tired every night. We didn't talk much. I decided pretty early on that I wasn't going to live like that. I wasn't going to come home tired and broke. I was going to make something of myself. And I did. By the time I was 32, I was managing a sales division at a manufacturing company on the north side of Chicago, industrial parts, nothing glamorous, but I was good at it. I was the guy who got the contract. I was the guy who flew to Cincinnati on Christmas Eve, if that is what it took. I wasn't a bad man. I want to be clear about that. I never hit anyone. I never cheated anyone. I provided for my family. We had a nice house in Evanston, new car every few years. My kids went to good schools, but I'll tell you something. Being a provider and being a father, those are two different things. And I spent 30 years thinking they were the same thing. I married Ruth in 1965. She was 22, I was 23. We had Robert in 1967, Diane in 1970, Karen in 1970, Karen in 1974. Ruth was everything those kids had. She drove them to school. She went to the games. She helped with the science projects. She was the one who noticed when something was wrong. I wasn't around to notice. I was traveling 3 weeks out of 4 in the early 70s. My boss at the time, a guy named Frank Hollis, he used to say, "The man who gets on the plane gets the deal." And I believed him. I got on the plane. Every time. I remember Robert's first baseball game. He was 9 years old. I missed it. I was in Cleveland at a trade show. Ruth told me he looked into the stands 3 times. She said after the game, he just asked if I was coming. She told him I had to work. He said, "Okay," and he went inside. I told myself that was fine. I told myself he'd understand when he was older, that when he had his own bills to pay, he'd get it. I kept telling myself that for 20 years. Diane's high school graduation was in 1988. I was there for that one. I remember standing in the gymnasium and thinking, she's grown. When did she get grown? I genuinely didn't know. I'd been gone so long that my own daughter felt like someone I was meeting for the second time, and she knew it. I could see it on her face. She smiled for the picture, but it was a polite smile, the kind you give a distant relative. By 1989, I was regional vice president. I was making more money than my father ever saw in his life. I had a corner office with a view of Lake Michigan. I had a company car. I had a secretary who knew my schedule better than my own wife did. And I thought I had arrived. I genuinely thought this is what it was all for. The travel, the missed dinners, the early mornings. I thought I had won something. I didn't understand yet what I had actually traded. By 1998, I was 56 years old. I had retired from the company 2 years earlier, not voluntarily. The new ownership brought in a younger team. I was given a transition package, which is a polite way of saying they showed me the door. I didn't handle it well. I poured everything into a real estate investment that a guy from my old golf club was putting together. Strip malls and commercial property in the suburbs south of Chicago. I put in a significant amount of money, more than I should have. Ruth asked me twice if I was sure about it. I told her I knew what I was doing. One Tuesday afternoon in October, I remember the light coming through the kitchen window. I was on the phone trying to track down one of the other investors. The deal was getting complicated. Money wasn't moving the way it was supposed to. And that is when Karen called. Karen was 24. She'd gotten married the year before to a young man named Paul. I barely knew Paul. I'd met him twice. I hadn't been at their first anniversary dinner because, as I recall, I had a meeting. She called me crying. She said, "Dad, I don't know what to do." Paul and her voice broke. She was scared. She needed her father. And I said, "Karen, I am in the middle of something. Let me call you back. She said, okay, Dad, and she hung up. I want you to hear this clearly. I was not in an emergency. I was not saving a life. I was trying to track down a business deal. A deal that, by the way, fell apart anyway 8 months later. I lost most of what I put in. I called Karen back 3 days later. She picked up. I asked how she was doing. She said, it is fine, Dad, we worked it out. I said, good, I knew you would. And I probably changed the subject to the investment. I honestly don't remember, but she remembers. I know that because 7 years later, in 2005, she finally told me. She said, when I called you that day, I was sitting on the kitchen floor. I had been crying for 3 hours, and you told me to wait. I didn't know what to say. I told her I was sorry. She said, I know. And the way she said it, quiet, tired, that wasn't forgiveness. That was just someone who had already stopped expecting anything different. Ruth died in 2011 stroke. She was in the hospital for 4 days. All 3 kids came. I remember sitting in that waiting room, Robert on one side, Diane on the other, Karen across from me. And I remember thinking, when is the last time we were all in the same room? I couldn't remember. I genuinely could not remember the last time we were all together. Ruth's birthday, maybe years back. She died on a Wednesday morning. We buried her in a cemetery in Evanston, not far from the house. And after the burial, the kids went back to their own lives. Robert flew home to Portland. Diane drove back to Indianapolis. Karen drove back to wherever she was living. And I went home to a house that had been quiet for a long time, but it never felt quiet like that before. I'm going to describe to you what my life looks like now, because I want to be honest. I have a neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, who checks on me twice a week. I have a home aide who comes in on Thursdays. I have a doctor I see every 6 weeks for my blood pressure and the arthritis in my hands. Robert sends a card at Christmas. Sometimes he calls on my birthday. We talk for maybe 8-10 minutes. He asks how I am feeling. I ask about his kids. We say we'll talk soon. Diane hasn't spoken to me since 2009. I wrote her a letter in 2012. She never responded. I wrote another one in 2018. Nothing, Karen. She moved to Phoenix years ago. We talk maybe once a year, short calls, careful, like 2 people who have agreed not to talk about the thing that broke everything. You know what the hardest part is? It is not the silence. It is that I understand it. I understand exactly why they're distant, and I can't argue with it, not one bit. Every night I sit in a chair by the front window. I watch the street. I watch the neighbors come home from work. I watch the kids across the street play in the yard until their mother calls them in. And I think about all the yards my kids played in that I never watch. I've had a lot of time to think about this, and here is what I've come to. I wasn't a victim of my ambition. I made choices. Every single missed dinner was a choice. Every ignored phone call was a choice. Every time Ruth said, the kids want to see you this weekend, and I said, I've got to be in Detroit. That was a choice. I've heard people say things like, the culture back then was different, or men of my generation were raised to provide, not to be present. And there is some truth in that, but I've also known men my age, same era, same industry, who coached Little League, who made it home for dinner, who knew their kids. So that is not the whole answer. The truth is, the work was easier than the family. At work, I knew what I was doing. I was good at it. People respected me. There were clear goals, clear results. At home, I didn't know how to be still. I didn't know how to just sit with my kids and not be useful, not be productive, not be solving something. I didn't know how to just be there. And nobody told me that being there was the whole job. I am not asking you to feel sorry for me. I made the bed. I know that. But if you are watching this and you are where I was in the middle of the climb, telling yourself the family will understand, telling yourself there is time, telling yourself you'll make it up later, I am telling you, there is no later, there is only right now. And right now keeps moving. If I could go back and tell myself 3 things. The first one is this: your kids are not going to remember the car you drove or the title on your business card. They're going to remember whether you showed up. That is it, whether you physically showed up. The baseball game, the school play, the random Tuesday night, show up. The second thing, When someone you love calls you in pain, stop what you are doing. Whatever it is, stop. Business problems can wait until tomorrow. Your daughter sitting on her kitchen floor crying. That cannot. The moment passes, and sometimes the person passes with it. The third thing, and this one took me the longest to learn, money is not a substitute for time. I know that sounds simple, but I really believed for most of my life that if I was providing financially, I was doing my part. That was wrong, completely wrong. A bigger house doesn't replace a father who listens. A college fund doesn't replace a dad who noticed when something was wrong. Money fixes problems. It cannot fix absence. Teach Wednesday afternoon as I am telling you this. The house is quiet. My phone hasn't rung today. I had a good career. I really did. I built something, made real money, earned real respect from people who knew the business. But I am 84 years old, and I am sitting alone in a house full of photographs of people who love me from a distance. And I keep thinking, what if just once, back in 1976, I had gotten on that drive to Evanston instead of getting on the plane to Cleveland? What if I had just been there? I'll never know, but you still can.